So one thing I didn't expect when I started this is a somewhat similar sort of disorienting thing, which is that I always thought opium smoking had some deep history in Asia. Maybe perhaps in India, because cannabis smoking has a very deep history in India, and I just always assumed that there was some kind of connection there, that perhaps it had been mixed together. As far as I can tell, opium smoking is a direct product of Portuguese colonial intervention in South Asia and Persia. Meaning, even though the Portuguese didn't invent the idea of opium smoking, they served as middlemen joining together a technology, the pipe, with the substance. The reason for this is typically portrayed as the fact that pipes are from the New World. This is sort of the starting point, which is true. Europeans did not have a pipe technology, so far as I can tell. And we see this, King James of England writes a condemnation of tobacco smoking. Sir Walter Raleigh, there's a famous, maybe apocryphal story that his servant saw him smoking a pipe, and the servant threw a pitcher of water onto him because he thought he was on fire, So we have all these kinds of accounts that show that Europeans did not have a culture of smoking. In fact, they didn't have a verb for it. They drink smoke originally, and then they have to use smoke as a transitive verb later. But the New World is not the only place where pipes are found. There's actually a very long and well-attested archaeological record of cannabis smoking in Africa. And this goes back at least as far as 1000 CE, so it's no question that this was something indigenous to East Africa and not brought there by the Europeans. How does that relate to opium? What I've been starting to believe is that the key invention in the history of opium smoking, and the thing that turns opium into something which is then refigured as foreign and exotic and somewhat illegitimate to Europeans, is the invention of the water pipe, or the hookah. There's various names for it. This is a distinctively early modern invention. For one thing, the form that we see here, this blown glass, is actually high technology in this period. It's very difficult to blow glass like that. And it's not something which is easily done. This would have been an expensive thing, and it was a thing that was a form of display, often in courts. So this one is part of an account of the Shah of Persia's court, where he has this exotic pipe. If we look into it further, we find that the origins of this pipe come from seemingly a calabash, a water pipe made from calabash, which is from East Africa. And I'll get later into a little bit of linguistic evidence that suggests that the route of transmission of the water pipe is separate from the route of transmission of New World, indigenous American pipes. So this is actually two separate points of invention for pipe smoking technologies, and that this particular one is sort of an Indian Ocean version of it. The water pipe comes seemingly from Egypt or East Africa, and then spreads throughout Persia and India in the 16th century, possibly carried by the Portuguese or possibly by other merchants. The point is, though, that originally it was designed to smoke cannabis. It was only with the introduction of Portuguese traded tobacco from the New World that this hookah, becomes a kind of universal smoking device, a new technological implement where you can throw anything onto the top of it with the coals and see what happens. Basically, my argument here is that there's a technological innovation which results in a culture of experimentation. People in different courts, in different situations throughout the Indian Ocean are just trying out different things with these water pipes. And we have documentary evidence attesting to the smoking not just of tobacco, but I found a Portuguese doctor who recommends smoking ambergris mixed with rosemary for a cough, which sounds like it could actually work. I haven't tried it, but it probably smells nice at least. And we also see very early mentions of opium and cannabis mix being smoked. And these are Portuguese texts talking about it. So that's one part of it. The other part is this, I keep saying the word orientalization. I don't know if that's the right word to use. We can get into that. But the point is that opium becomes very closely associated with Turks and Persians in particular. And this is so common that it's just almost a viral meme in the early modern world. The Turk just becomes the guy that makes and smokes opium. And this is actually not, someone had to invent that. It's not a very well-attested thing prior to the late 16th, early 17th century, and it just sort of takes off. I think it has to do with fears of the Ottomans in this period. So the Ottomans are expansionist in this time, and they're getting kind of scary. And we see this in the descriptions themselves. When you read them, it's very interesting because it refigures opium intoxication as something which is stimulant and something which is violent. It's almost the inverse of the 19th century dreamy, bohemian, Baudelaire kind of opium that I came into this project imagining to find. So I have this one quote, which I'm just going to read in brief. It's from Giuseppe Donzelli, I butchered that, Giuseppe Donzelli, who's a Neapolitan apothecary, who says that Turkish soldiers eat it especially when they are in times of danger at war, becoming almost drunken with it, and thereby not noticing their danger. So it's a bit like a Viking berserker, is how it's being portrayed. And then we also have this very interesting, very early quote from a manuscript collected by Charles Boxer. It's the earliest Spanish account of the Philippines. And I find this kind of interesting because it's actually turning opium into a foreign thing at a very early date. So what they're talking about here, Antion, is that it's being portrayed as a kind of Philippine herb, like a foreign thing that results in, or not, it's more like Pan East Indies herb. This manuscript goes widely in talking about the Philippines and the kind of other cultures which are influencing it. So here it's talking about Malaysian warriors who are basically running amok. This is the origin of the phrase running amok. But if you look at the word itself, and here I'm going off of Boxer, he's like the expert in Portuguese history, so I trust him on this etymological link. He thinks that it's actually, the manuscript was written in Portuguese and then was then translated into Spanish, and it survives as a Spanish manuscript. He thinks this is a transcription error for the Portuguese word amfiao, which is just Greek. It's just from the Greek word opium. So in fact, what's happened here is a Greek word for opium has gotten turned into this kind of exotic East Indies thing that makes people run amok. And this kind of thing keeps happening, this transcription error, translation errors, or even intentional tweaking of this substance to make it seem frightening. It keeps reappearing in the 16th and 17th centuries as a sort of token of the Oriental world, or the East Indies.